When Everett Sloan died in his sleep at the age of 88, the town of Millbrook Hollow, Vermont did what it always did when one of its own passed. They brought casseroles. They swapped stories on porches. They talked about the old beekeeper who smelled like wood smoke and clover honey, who wore the same canvas jacket for 30 years, and who never once, in anyone's memory, complained about money. What they did not expect was the letter from a law firm in Burlington, addressed to his granddaughter, informing her that Everett Sloan's estate was valued at $8 million, for $100,000. The town's only beekeeper. A man who sold jars of honey for $6 a piece at the Saturday market and drove a truck with 200,000 miles on it. A man who patched his own boots rather than buy new ones, and who was known to walk the long way around the hardware store just to avoid the temptation of anything he didn't need. At the funeral, the pastor joked gently that Everett's idea of splurging was buying the good kind of oats for the horses at the county fair. And the whole church laughed, because everyone there had a version of that same story. $8 million for $100,000. To understand how a man like that built a fortune like this, you have to go back to 1958, to a boy of 11 standing in an orchard behind a stranger's farmhouse, terrified of the low hum coming from a row of white wooden boxes. The stranger was Walter Timmons, the last full-time beekeeper left in the hollow, a widower with no children and a reputation for being difficult. Everett's own father had died the winter before, leaving his mother to raise 3 children on a seamstress's wages. Walter needed a boy willing to work for almost nothing. Everett needed almost anything. "Bees don't panic," Walter told him that first afternoon, guiding his trembling hands toward a frame heavy with comb. "The ones that panic get stung. The ones that stay calm and move slow, they get to keep their honey." It became the rule Everett lived by, though he did not know yet how far it would carry him. Walter paid him in coins at first, and eventually in something closer to trust. He taught him to read a hive the way other men read weather, to know from the sound alone whether a colony was thriving or in trouble. By the time Everett was 17, he ran 24 hives on his own, waking before dawn to check them before school. By 20, Walter was too old to climb the orchard ladder, and the whole operation, modest as it was, belonged to Everett in every way but paper. "I put a little away every month," the old man said one evening, counting cash from the honey stand into a cigar box on his kitchen table. "Not in the bank. In the market. A broker in town set it up for me years back. Something called an index fund. You don't try to pick winners. You just buy a little piece of everything, and you leave it alone." Everett was 21 and skeptical. He had watched his mother stretch every dollar until it screamed, and the idea of handing money to strangers on Wall Street felt like a betrayal of everything he'd learned about holding tight to what little you had. He said as much. The stranger was Walter Timmons, the last full-time beekeeper left in the hollow, a widower with no children and a reputation for being difficult. Everett's own father had died the winter before, leaving his mother to raise 3 children on a seamstress's wages. Walter needed a boy willing to work for almost nothing. Everett needed almost anything. "Bees don't panic," Walter told him that first afternoon, guiding his trembling hands toward a frame heavy with comb. "The ones that panic get stung. The ones that stay calm and move slow, they get to keep their honey." It became the rule Everett lived by, though he did not know yet how far it would carry him. Walter paid him in coins at first, and eventually in something closer to trust. He taught him to read a hive the way other men read weather, to know from the sound alone whether a colony was thriving or in trouble. By the time Everett was 17, he ran 24 hives on his own, waking before dawn to check them before school. By 20, Walter was too old to climb the orchard ladder, and the whole operation, modest as it was, belonged to Everett in every way but paper. "I put a little away every month," the old man said one evening, counting cash from the honey stand into a cigar box on his kitchen table. "Not in the bank. In the market. A broker in town set it up for me years back. Something called an index fund. You don't try to pick winners. You just buy a little piece of everything, and you leave it alone." Everett was 21 and skeptical. He had watched his mother stretch every dollar until it screamed, and the idea of handing money to strangers on Wall Street felt like a betrayal of everything he'd learned about holding tight to what little you had. He said as much. 1987 arrived without warning. Everett remembered standing in the feed store listening to the radio report the stock market's worst single day in history, prices falling faster than anyone on the broadcast could explain. Around him, men he'd known his whole life spoke of pulling out, of cutting losses, of never trusting paper money again as long as they lived. Everett went home and made his contribution anyway. Didn't ask him to. He just did it, the way Walter had taught him to keep working the hives through a summer storm instead of running for the house at the first clap of thunder. The dot-com crash of 2000 came next, wiping out fortunes built on companies that had never sold a single product or turned a single dollar of profit. Everett didn't own any of them by name. He owned a little piece of everything, the way Walter always said to, and everything eventually recovered the way it always had before. By 2008, Everett was 61, and the Hollow had grown used to the idea of him as a fixture, out among his hives at dawn regardless of the weather, still hauling supers by hand though his knees had long since started complaining. When the financial crisis hit and the news spoke of banks collapsing and retirement accounts cut in half overnight, his neighbors watched their savings shrink with real and reasonable fear. Everett watched too. Then, that October, he increased his monthly contribution. "Prices are on sale," he told her, sliding the new figure across the table for her to enter in the ledger. "Same principle as buying supers cheap in the off-season. You don't wait for things to get expensive again before you decide to buy them." Didn't argue. She never had. She simply wrote the new number down and kept the books the way she always had. Steady as the man across the table from her. 2020 brought a different kind of storm. One that emptied the Saturday market for the first time in 50 years and closed the little school where his granddaughter, Nora, had just started teaching. Everett was 73 that spring, still climbing the orchard ladder against his daughter's wishes, still setting aside his contribution on the first of every month like a man winding a clock that had never once run late. It was Nora who inherited the hives in the years that followed, after passed quietly in her sleep the winter before, and it was Nora, more than anyone, who inherited the lesson along with them. She remembers standing beside her grandfather at 11 years old, the same age he'd been when Walter first put a frame in his hands, watching him check on a swarm without a trace of fear on his face. "Bees don't panic," he told her, exactly as Walter had told him nearly 60 years before. "The ones that stay calm keep their honey." He taught her the market the same patient way, sitting with her on the porch steps some evenings after the hives were checked. Not with charts or predictions, not with the language of brokers, but with the plain arithmetic of time laid out slow enough for a child to follow. A little money, left alone, put in consistently, becomes a lot of money, given enough seasons to work. Once, when she was 16 and the market had dropped sharply over some crisis she'd heard about on the news, Nora asked him if he was worried. Everett set down the frame he was inspecting and thought about it for a long moment before answering. "The way he thought about most things that I've buried 2 market crashes I was sure would ruin me," he said. "And both times the bees kept making honey right through it and the honey kept selling and the little check I sent off every month kept turning into a bigger pile than the check before it. The market's just weather. You don't stop tending the hive because it's raining." She wrote the line down in a school notebook that evening, not fully understanding it yet. She says she understands it completely now. Everett never moved from the small house he and had raised their children in. He never traded the truck for something newer, patching the same dents he'd put in it decades before. He gave away more honey most years than he sold, dropping jars on the porches of the sick and the grieving without being asked and without saying who'd left them. Nobody in Millbrook Hollow ever thought to call him wealthy, because nothing about how he lived, not one single habit, ever asked them to. When the will was read in the same law office that had sent Nora the letter, it explained what the $8,400,000 was actually for. A trust to fund the town's small agricultural high school program for the next 50 years, so that any child interested in bees, orchards, or simply working with their hands would never be turned away for lack of money. A separate fund to keep the Saturday market rent-free for its vendors, indefinitely. And to Nora, the apiary itself, along with a note in his own handwriting, folded once and tucked inside the same cigar box Walter had left him. "You already have the real inheritance," it read. The rest was just proof that the lesson worked. Nora kept the note exactly where she found it, in that same cigar box that had passed from Walter's kitchen table to Everett's and now sat on her own, empty of everything but that single folded page and a scatter of old coins nobody had ever thought to spend. She still runs the hives every spring, still wakes before the sun the way he taught her to. She still makes her own contribution on the first of the month, the amount a little larger every year as her teaching salary allows, the habit itself exactly the same as it always was. And on quiet mornings, when the hollow is still waking up and the bees are just beginning to stir in the cool orchard air, she says she can still hear him, as clearly as if he were standing beside her at the hives. Move slow. Stay calm. Let it build. 62 years. That's how long Everett Sloan kept his promise to a dead man's advice. One honey check, one quiet deposit, one uneventful Tuesday at a time. Through every crash the market ever threw at him, he never called himself an investor. He never once used the word, not even at the very end, not even to the lawyer drawing up the papers that would eventually surprise an entire town. He called himself a beekeeper plainly whenever anyone asked. But he understood, better than most people ever will, that a fortune built slowly enough and left alone long enough is really just a hive that nobody ever disturbed.